Well, it looks like it is 10:17, so I think we will get started. Welcome to Migrating to Drupal 8 as part of a website redesign. My name is Karen Horrocks, and I am a web developer with the nonprofit Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. You can find me at Karen11 on Drupal.org and at Karen11Dev on Twitter. The Physicians Committee was founded in 1985 with the mission to save and improve human and animal lives through plant-based diets and ethical and effective scientific research. 2 years ago, we began a process to redesign our website. Since our old website used Drupal 7, it made sense to use the opportunity to migrate our website to Drupal 8. However, migrating as part of a website redesign did present some unique challenges. During today's session, I will go over the reasons for the redesign and the challenges faced during the migration. I'll briefly review Drupal's Migrate API and how to create custom migrations. Then I will show how we used Migrate API to solve challenges migrating our archive of news articles to the new website. One challenge involved migrating content into the data structure for our new component-based design. Another challenge involved selecting only the content that needed to be migrated from the old website. Finally, I will show how we put the custom module and used it to migrate our archive of news articles. First, let's go over the reasons for the redesign. If you had visited the Physicians Committee's website 2 years ago, this is what you would have seen. And if you're thinking, gee, this website looks like it's almost 10 years old, you would be right. The website was clearly in need of a refresh. But in addition to its dated look and feel, there are also issues presenting the two focuses of the Physicians Committee, health and nutrition and ethical research and education. The information was siloed, as you can see at the top of the homepage, with 2 separate sliders, one for each focus. Also, the website's navigation, which was limited to the menu items on the left, made information hard to find. Our content editors also didn't have much flexibility when creating pages, as there was a limited number of templates, and new templates could only be created by the web developers. Finally, since the website design was almost 10 years old, it did not provide a good experience on mobile. So we began a process to redesign both the look and feel and the information architecture of the website. We partnered with the digital agency 3Spot, and now if you visit the Physician Committee's website, this is what you'll see. 3Spot overhauled the design of the website, giving it a much more modern look and feel. 3Spot also worked with our communications team to review and revise most of the content on the website. As a result, the information is now better integrated with a single hero image, followed by our top 3 articles. The navigation was also redesigned to use drop-down menus that make information much easier to find. 3Spot also helped us move to a component-based design, which makes it much easier for our content editors to create new pages. Components are the building blocks used to put together a page. Our landing page on Protein includes components for the title, the featured text at the top, the standard text, and the flip cards, which are cards that flip when clicked to let you know how much protein is in each of the foods. I, along with my colleague, John Evans, worked with 3Spot to integrate the components they designed with Drupal using paragraphs. This makes it possible to add components to a page simply by adding paragraphs to a field on the node edit form. Now our content editors can easily put together an interactive page without any intervention from the web developers. 3Spot also created a mobile-first design that provides users a good experience on mobile, as you can see in this example of the Protein landing page on mobile. Since the Physicians Committee and 3Spot did all of this work to redesign the website, it made sense to use the opportunity to migrate the website to Drupal 8. However, migrating as part of a redesign does present some unique challenges. One challenge was that the data structure of the website changed, so the data needed to be mapped from the old structure. The new component-based design is integrated into Drupal using paragraphs, so most of the data from the old website needed to be mapped from fields and nodes to fields and paragraphs, which are then referenced by nodes. Another challenge was that most of the content was rewritten and reorganized, so only some content needed to be migrated from the old website. That meant that we needed to be selective about what content was pulled from the old website. Because of these challenges, it was necessary to create a custom migration using Drupal's Migrate API and other contributed migration modules. But before we look at those specific challenges, let's review the Migrate API. In Drupal, migration is an extract, transform, load, or ETL process. In this process, data is extracted from one or more sources, then the data is transformed before being loaded into a destination system. In the Migrate API, the extract phase is called source, the transform phase is called process, and the load phase is called destination. All three phases are defined in YAML-formatted migration definition files. Drupal core comes with 3 Migrate modules. Migrate provides the framework for migrating content from a source to a Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 website. Migrate Drupal and Migrate Drupal UI provide the tools needed to upgrade a Drupal 6 or 7 website to Drupal 8 or 9. Since we weren't upgrading our website as is, we did not use those 2 modules. However, we did use 2 tools, Migrate Tools and Migrate Plus. Migrate Tools provides the Drush and user interface tools needed to manage and run custom migrations. Migrate Plus allows migration plugins to be defined as configuration entities. It also provides some additional source, process, and destination plugins. Now let's look at an example of a migration definition file. This simple example is from the Migrate API documentation on Drupal.org. The migration definition file includes an ID, in this case, custom article migration, which provides a unique machine name for the migration. The label describes the migration in a readable format. The source section defines the source data. For simplicity, this example uses the embedded data plugin, which embeds the source data directly in the migration definition file. The source data includes 2 rows representing 2 pages with the fields ID, title, and content. Other source plugins include CSV for data in comma-separated value files and URL for data pulled from a URL in a JSON or XML format. Later, I will be showing you how to write your own custom SQL source plugin for data in a Drupal 7 database. Regardless of the source plugin used, a unique field in the source data that can be used to look up data in the migration tables should be specified. Here, the ID field in the source data is specified under IDs. The process section defines how the source data is mapped to the destination. The default plugin is get and simply gets a field and copies it to the destination. Since it is the default, the name of the get plugin does not need to be specified. In the example, the get plugin is used to copy the ID, title, and content fields in the source to the node ID, title, and body fields in the destination. There are many other process plugins that can be used to transform the data. For example, the concat plugin can be used to concatenate 2 fields from the source and copy it to a single field in the destination. Other process plugins include default value, which assigns a default field value if the field in the source is empty, and file copy, which copies a file like an image to the destination. These are just a small sample of the process plugins available. Best of all, process plugins can be chained so that several process plugins can be used on a single field. For example, concat can be used to concatenate 2 fields, then default value can be used to assign a default value if the result of the concatenation is empty. The destination section defines the destination of the data. The destination plugins include entity::node, entity::taxonomy term, and entity::file. Default bundle defines the plugin's type. In the example, entity::node is used as the destination plugin, and the default bundle defines the node's content type, which is article. Default bundle can also be used to define the taxonomy terms vocabulary or the type of file. Note that a migration definition file can only be used to migrate one type of entity. To migrate a different entity type, another migration definition file must be created. If you need to reference an entity from another migration, the IDs defined in the source section can be used to look up those entities. I should mention that it is very easy to misformat a YAML file. I've had migrations fail completely because of one extra space in the migration definition file. So be sure that there is one space after the colon in the key value pairs and 2 spaces for indentations. Also, if you get an error for which you can't find a reason, try validating your YAML file. Once you've completed your migration definition file, you need to create a custom module for the file to live. By default, migrations are managed in code. Changes are made directly to the migration definition file and require a cache rebuild for the changes to take effect. The module directory contains the usual info.yaml file, which defines the module. The migration definition files are placed in a migration subdirectory and are named with the ID of the migration. However, with the Migrate Plus module, migrations can also be managed in the configuration. This allows changes to be made and synced through the user interface. While it is a best practice to make major changes directly to the migration definition file, changing the configuration in the user interface can be used to make small adjustments, like changing the location of the source file. When managing in the configuration, a universally unique identifier, or UUID, should also be included in the migration definition file. This will ensure that the existing configuration is updated instead of creating a new configuration. Again, the module directory contains the usual info.yaml file. The difference is the migration definition files are located in the config/install subdirectory. Also, the file name convention is migrate_plus.migration.themigrationid.yaml. The contributed module Migrate Tools provides a user interface and Drush commands for managing migrations. The user interface can be found under Drupal's administration menu at Structure Migration. However, the preferred method for managing migrations is Drush commands, as the user interface can sometimes result in timeouts. To execute a migration, simply execute Drush migrate:import followed by the migration ID. Migrate:status can be used to check the status of the migration. If there are errors, migrate:rollback will roll back the migration. If the migration gets stuck, migrate:stop will stop the migration, and migrate:reset status will reset the status to idle. Note that the examples are for Drush 9 and above. For Drush 8, the commands would have dashes instead of colons. Migrate-import, for example. Now that we have a better idea of how the Migrate API works, let's take a look at how we use these tools to migrate content into components during the redesign of the Physician Committee's website. Some of the content we migrated from the old website was our archive of news articles. This is an example of one of our breaking medical news articles from the old website. The article summarizes the findings in a recent journal article and provides the citation for the journal article. In the example, the citation can be found below the main content in a smaller font. The news content type on the old website included a body field for the main content of the article and a citation field for the citation. Here is that same breaking medical news article on the new website. Because of the component-based design on the new website, instead of body and citations fields, the news content type has a components field, which is an entity reference revisions field of paragraphs. This field can be used to add multiple paragraphs to the node. Each paragraph is associated with a component, which determines how the content is styled. In this case, a rich text paragraph, which contains a rich text content field, is used for the main content, and a references paragraph, which also contains a rich text content field, is used for the citation. Like the old website, the references component uses a smaller font. So to migrate the news articles into the new data structure, it was necessary to first migrate the body and citation fields from the old website into fields in the rich text and reference paragraphs, then reference those paragraphs in the components field of a node. While this data structure may be more complicated, it does offer more flexibility for our content editors, as they can add as many different components to the news article as needed. So let's take a look at the migration definition file for the paragraphs. On the right is the complete migration definition file for the rich text paragraphs. The source section uses the News Node Source plugin, which is a custom SQL source plugin that I will show you how to write later. The key is the name of the database connection for the Drupal 7 database defined in the settings.php file. The process section contains a simple get plugin to copy the body field from the old website into the rich text content field of the paragraph. Since this field is formatted text, it has two subfields, value and format. The subfields are specified by adding a slash after the field name, then adding the name of the subfield. The destination section contains the destination plugin. Since the components field of the news content type uses an entity reference revision field, entity reference revisions : paragraph must be used as the plugin instead of entity : paragraph. Default bundle specifies the machine name of the paragraph type, which is rich text. Definition file only migrates the rich text paragraphs. To migrate the reference paragraphs, another migration definition file just like this one was created. The only differences are a different UUID and ID, and reference instead of rich text as the default bundle. So now that we have migration definition files for the paragraphs, we can migrate the body and citation fields from the old website into paragraphs on the new website. However, the paragraphs aren't referenced by anything yet. We need to reference these paragraphs when migrating the news articles. Before we see how that's done, let's look at two new migration concepts. The first is migration dependencies. The migration lookup process plugin is used to look up entities from a previous migration. And we'll use this plugin later to reference the paragraphs in the news article migration. However, we don't want to run the news article migration before the paragraphs have been migrated. So we need to include a migration dependencies section in the migration definition file for the news article migration. This section specifies the migrations that are required to have been run before this migration. In this example, the news paragraphs and news reference paragraphs migrations are required to have been run before the news article migration. The next concept is constants and pseudo fields. Both can be set and used later in the process pipeline. Constants are set in the source section and contain constant values. In this example of a file migration, the file dest path constant contains the destination path for the files being migrated. Pseudo fields are set in the process section and are used to temporarily store data for later use in the process section. In the example, the file dest pseudo field is used to store the destination file name for the file being migrated. It is created by concatenating the file dest path constant with the source file name. The file dest pseudo field is then used by the file copy plugin to copy the source URL to the destination file name. Notice that when constants are used, they're specified with the word constants followed by a slash and the name of the constant. When pseudo fields are used, they're specified with an @ and surrounded by quotes. Now let's look at the migration definition file for the news article migration. The source section is the same as the paragraph migrations, and the destination section uses entity : node as the plugin and news as the default bundle. So let's focus on the process section. In the process section, we have two pseudo fields, temp text and temp references, which look up the rich text and reference paragraphs. The migration lookup plugin specifies both the ID of the migrations and the field used to look up the paragraphs in the migration tables, in this case, the node ID. Since the paragraphs migration used an entity reference revisions paragraph destination plugin, there are two IDs stored for each paragraph, the entity ID and the entity revision ID. The migration lookup plugin returns both IDs as an array and stores them in the pseudo fields. The pseudo fields are then copied to the components field using the subprocess plugin. The subprocess plugin runs an array of arrays through a process pipeline, essentially a mini version of the migration definition file. In this case, the source is the arrays stored in the temp text and temp references pseudo fields. The process is a simple get plugin, which assigns the array element with index 0 to the target ID subfield and the array element with the index 1 to the target revision ID subfield. This associates both the rich text paragraph and the reference paragraph with the components field in the node. And that's how we were able to migrate the text fields from the old website into paragraphs referenced by nodes in the new website. Excuse me. Now, as promised, let's look at how to write a custom SQL source plugin to select content from the Drupal 7 database. For the news article migration, we needed to select our archive of news articles from the old website. The news articles were in the news content type and contained three types of news articles: breaking medical news, breaking research news, and news releases. This shot is an example of one of our news releases from the old website. The category text field indicated the type of article. This is important because we decided to migrate all of the breaking medical news and breaking research news articles, but only news releases since 2016. So we needed to use the category along with the created date to skip news articles older than January 1st, 2016. The custom SQL source plugin can be used to both select the content from the Drupal 7 database and only return the content we want to migrate. One of the great things about Migrate API is that most of the work can be done in YAML files. However, for the custom SQL source plugin, we do need to write some PHP. The code on the right shows the basic framework for the custom SQL source plugin. The plugin is placed in the src/plugin/migrate/source subdirectory of our custom migration module, Migrate News. As you can see, the namespace includes the module name. The migrate source annotation, which describes the plugin, also includes the module name. The ID in the migrate source annotation is the name of the source plugin used in the migration definition file, in this case, news_nodes. The plugin extends the SQL-based class provided by the core Migrate module. It must implement the query, fields, and getID methods. It can also optionally implement the prepare row method. Let's take a look at each of these methods. The query method returns a query built using Drupal's database API. For the news article migration, we needed to select nodes from the node table that are of type news and have a status equal to 1, which means they are published. So the select method is used to select the NID, title, and created date from the node table with those conditions. We also needed the contents of the body and citations field for the paragraph migrations, as well as the category field, which will be used to determine the type of article so that news releases before 2016 can be skipped. In Drupal 7, custom fields have their own tables, so those tables need to be joined to the query with the left join method. Both the value and the format of the body field are added to the query with the fields method. For the category and citations fields, the add field method is used so that aliases can be created for each field. That way, instead of having to type field_citations_value, we can simply type citations. The fields method returns the source fields. The fields are set to the column names or aliases returned by the query. The getIDs method returns the source fields that uniquely identify the source row, in this case, the node ID. You may have noticed that the migration definition file for the paragraphs did not include IDs in the source section. That's because it is defined here in the custom SQL source plugin, so it does not need to be included in the migration definition file. The prepare row method is optional, but can be used to modify each source row. In this case, it is used to skip news releases before 2016. First, the get source property method is used to get the category and create a date for the row. Then those values are used to determine if the row is a news release with a created date older than January 1st, 2016. If it is, false is returned to skip the row. If not, the row is returned. The prepare row method can also be used to add or modify fields in the row. In that case, a set source property method would be used to create a new field or modify an existing one. Now, usually it is easier to use a process plugin in the migration definition file to transform the source data. However, if you need to do something particularly complicated, it may be easier to use prepare row. Now that we have our custom SQL source plugin, we need to define the source database connection. Drupal's database API allows multiple database connections to be defined in the settings.php file. In this example, the Drupal 7 database connection information is stored in a JSON formatted file in the private directory. The contents of the file are read and added to the database's array. The first key in the database's array is the name of the connection. The name is included in the source section of the migration definition file as the key. So using the News Nodes custom SQL source plugin and the Drupal 7 database connection, we can now select exactly the data we want from the old website. Let's put it all together by looking at the Migrate News custom module and how to run the news article migration. The Migrate News custom module lives in the Migrate News directory. The directory includes the Migrate News info.yaml file that defines the module. The config/install subdirectory contains the migration definition files for the rich text paragraphs, reference paragraphs, and the news article nodes. The src/plugin/migrate/source subdirectory contains the News Nodes custom SQL source plugin that is used in the migration definition files. To execute the migration, the migrate:import drush command is run for the paragraph migrations first, then the node migration. The status of the migration can be checked with migrate:status. If there is an issue, the node migration can be rolled back with migrate:rollback. Then the migration definition file can be updated to fix any errors. The Migrate News module manages the migrations in configuration. So the config:import drush command needs to be run to sync the configuration with the updated migration definition file. Migrate:import can then be used to run the node article migration again. One of the advantages of this process is that you can easily test migrations, then roll them back if there are errors. And you can just keep doing this until you get it right. I should note that the Migrate News module in this presentation is a simplified version of the module that we ultimately used. I wanted to make sure the examples could easily be understood in the presentation. Though I don't have code examples, I wanted to briefly go over some of the other challenges encountered during the migration and how we dealt with them. As you may have noticed in the screenshots, the news articles included a featured image. On the old website, the image was contained in the body content. On the new website, the featured image has its own media entity reference field. So the images needed to be removed from the body content and migrated to the new media entity reference field. So the prepare row method in the custom SQL source plugin was used to extract the img tag from the body content. The set source property method was used to add the new field with the URL of the image to the row. And the modified body content with the img tag removed was also added to the row. The next challenge was migrating the images themselves, as they needed to be media entities in order to be referenced by the new featured image field. After some trial and error, I determined that the image migration needed to be done in 3 steps. First, the images needed to be migrated to the new website as file entities. Then the file entities needed to be migrated as media entities. And finally, the media entities needed to be referenced by the featured image field in the news article migration. This required 2 additional migration definition files. One that uses the file copy process plugin to copy the images from the old website, and the entity::file destination plugin to migrate the images as file entities. The second migration definition file uses the migration lookup plugin to look up the file entities, and the entity::media destination plugin to migrate the file entities as media entities. Then a migration lookup process plugin is used in the migration definition file for the news article migration to look up the media entities and reference them in the featured image field. So in conclusion, migrating as part of a redesign does present some unique challenges, but these challenges can be solved by creating a custom migration with the Migrate API and contributed modules. Before we get to questions, I wanted to include some resources that I have found helpful, including the Migrate API documentation from Drupal.org, an overview of the core and contributed modules from Drupal.org, and 31 Days of Migrations, a series of blog posts from the Understand Drupal website that covers everything you need to know about migrations. Thank you so much for your attention. I would greatly appreciate it if you could fill out the evaluation at the link provided. Link to the slides on my Twitter account, Karen11Dev, so you don't need to memorize these URLs. And now it's time for questions. So let me roll back and see what we've got. Let's see. Okay. Okay, the slides will be available online. I will tweet those. Are you defining your own UUID? Yes, I am defining my own UUID when I write the migration definition file. If I was building this from scratch without this background, is it documented anywhere that format is also required for rich text? I'm not sure I understand the question. If you wanted to try again, I'll see if I can answer it. How to migrate a user entity when a user is a reference entity for other user? You know, I don't know the answer to that one. There is a entity::user destination plugin that you can use to migrate users, but I'm not sure how you would do that if it's referencing another user. See, we've recently decided to make clients sign in blood that they understand the potential search engine traffic ramifications of dropping old, no longer wanted content. We recommended bringing it over with a disclaimer, even if intentionally orphaned from navigation, until it can be redirected to relevant and ideally unique replacement. What were the considerations and conversations around SEO and this redesign migration? You know, at this point, you know, at the point we were at with the website, the information really just needed to be refreshed. I mean, we do deal with medical. We want. So I don't think we were too concerned about the SEO ramifications of that. We just wanted to make sure we had the most up-to-date information possible and that it was easy to find. Do the slides contain all the necessary code? If not, is there a repository with these samples that we could look at? There isn't a repository. and like I said, the code is a simplified version of what we did, but the code is in itself complete. You could use it as a guide to create your own migrations. And as I said, the references I linked to also have a lot of great examples that you could use. See. Follow up to question from above, what methods have you taken to combat 404s from not migrating older news releases or other content that might not have been migrated 1.1? Essentially, we just, we created a 404 page that, made it clear that, we had just done a redesign and to try using search if they couldn't find what they wanted. Is Migrate an efficient method of copying deprecated field data to new fields within the same site? I mean, it certainly could be used. I think the feeds module might also be another option. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's the most efficient method, but it certainly could be used. Let's see. I'm not on Twitter. Is there any other way to get your slides, please? You don't need to be on Twitter. You can just put in twitter.com and then my my Twitter handle, and it'll take you to my profile page, and you can read my tweets there. And my Twitter handle, somebody asked about that. It is Karen11Dev. I think it's there on the final slide. Let's see. The question, field collections, bad or good? Well, field collections have been kind of, replaced by paragraphs, and I'd say paragraphs are good, so. How easy is it to use Migration API for those with beginner site builder level skills? Well, as I said, one of the great things about the Migrate API is a lot of it is done using YAML files. So you don't necessarily need to know how to do PHP coding. So I think, a beginner could probably, work with it. And again, as I said, it's possible to run a migration and then roll it back. So you can just, do trial and error until you get it right. Okay. Any other migration issues you encounter that you did not mention? I'm sure there were lots of migration issues. We did this migration 2 years ago, so I think I covered sort of the big ones. But yeah, I mean, there's always little issues. Like I said, one extra space in my YAML file, and it blew up the whole migration. But again, as I said, you can migrate and roll back and just keep doing that until you get it right. Are there any other questions? How long did the migration process take, and how many people were involved? I am attempting to do this alone for a large website, and it is proving rather difficult since I will be needing multiple custom migrations as well. Actually, I did the migration myself. My colleague, John Evans, he was working on the paragraph integration while I was working on the migration. And the process to do the migration, it probably took a couple of months. But I mean, it is possible to do it on your own. I did. See, how do you validate the YAML file? There are YAML validators out on the web that you can use to validate. Have you run into any bottleneck timeouts when migrating large files, images, etc.? If so, how do you get around that bottleneck when using a host with limited resources? Yeah, that is a difficult one. Like I said, I generally, it's generally better to use Drush instead of the user interface for just this reason. Sometimes when you're using the user interface, you can run into timeouts. But one thing you could potentially do is just do your migration in batches. Only migrate some files at once if you're dealing with limited resources. Question, how many content types did you migrate? Let's see, we migrated the news content type. Most of the news content type, as I said, we only migrated news releases from 2016 and on. We also migrated, I didn't discuss this, but our website has, we run a program called Food for Life, which offers classes on plant-based diets and cooking. So we have content types for our Food for Life classes and Food for Life instructors that needed to be migrated from the old website. I didn't get into that because that seemed like a very specific kind of migration, and talking about news articles seemed like more of a general thing that lots of people would face. I don't recall off the top of my head how many content types that was, but I think the Food for Life information and then the news articles were the two big things that we migrated from the old website. Did you use Composer for anything? I mean, if you're on Drupal 8, you're going to be using Composer. You don't really need to use, you need to use Composer to install the contributed migration modules, but you don't really need to use it for your own custom modules. Did you keep the same NIDs or change? We changed them. We didn't try to keep the same NIDs. Any other questions? Okay, well, it is 11 o'clock, so I think I will let everybody go. Again, thank you very much for your attention, and I will be tweeting these slides later, and if you have any questions, feel free to tweet me, or I think you can actually contact me on the Hopin site, at least until the end of the event, and thank you very much.